Hello, folks. This is Rajiv Srinivasan, and welcome to my podcast, the Shadow Warrior podcast. This is episode 168, and this is about the just concluded 12-day Iran Israel war, brief but brutal, and what we could take away from it. First, there is the geoeconomics and geopolitical angle. Second, there are the tactics of the two belligerents, in fact, the three, including the Americans. And then finally, what impact this may have had on the rest of the world, especially from India's point of view. So, to look at the geopolitics first, the fact of the matter is that almost all the mischief in the Middle East has its origins in what the British deep state, i.e., Whitehall, did about a century ago. And of course, that has continued with the American deep state in the later years of the 20th century. What Britain did, along to some extent with France, was the carving up of the remains of the Ottoman Empire in rather random ways. They just drew some lines here and there with basically no attention being paid to ethnic or religious or linguistic differences, and that has led to all kinds of problems. And I remember the Sykes-Picot Act, and then later the Balfour Declaration, and then the Palestine Mandate, so on. A little bit hazy and back away a century ago, but that has basically led to the conflicts, I believe. And then, of course, the fact that there is oil there. Now, that obviously made West Asia far more interesting to imperial powers, but to the extent that the problems in Iran may have started with the British attempt to grab Iran's oil. So Mossadegh, Mohammad Mossadegh, who was the elected, democratically elected prime minister, was overthrown in 1953. And so far as I can tell, it is because he nationalized Iranian oil, therefore irritating British petroleum. And so obviously he had to go. And then they did the usual color revolution, which is something that the deep state specializes in, randomly bring some person in and say, anoint them as the ruler. So in this case, it was the Shah Pahlavi, who was the Shah of Iran, Shah Reza Pahlavi. He was already there, but he was a monarch without much power. But they installed him, and that was not a particularly popular move with the Iranian public for whatever reason. And so a few years later, in 1979, when the mullahs arose against him, the people were ready to overthrow him. So that's sort of the background there. And now, fast forward to 2025, we've seen a lot of saber rattling by the Iranians over the last few decades about how America is a great Satan and I guess Israel is a little Satan or whatever, and they keep swearing that they will absolutely obliterate Israel. So this is standard rhetoric on their part. And I think what Israel wanted to do was to try and do three things. One is they knew, well, the rest of the world also knows that Iran is not far from being able to produce a nuclear bomb. They wanted to put a stop to that, just like they did to Iraq's nuclear program by bombing the Osirak reactor some years ago. And they also promised, or actually attempted to do that to Kahuta and Pakistan's nuclear program, and they asked India for cooperation. India refused for whatever reason some years ago. So that was one of their biggest issues. The second was Iran has been using a number of proxies, the Hamas, the Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and they've been running around creating havoc. Of course, Israel faced Hamas's direct impact on October 7th, 2023, and Gaza has been overrun by them. Then the Hezbollah have been in Lebanon, a pretty powerful militia, and then the Houthis in Yemen. So what Israel wanted to do was to deprecate their capabilities, and in fact, they went ahead and did quite a good job of that. They assassinated some of the Hamas leadership, Yahya Sinwar, for example. They blew up Hamas's tunnels in Gaza, and they assassinated Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. So those have been degraded and deprecated in their ability to wage war on Israel or others, but they're not gone by any means. They're still there. It's just that Israel has partly succeeded in defanging them. And the third objective was to do regime change and push out the Ali Khamenei, Ayatollah, and his people. Now, I don't believe that that's going to happen because, as much as the Iranians may not be happy with the Ayatollah and the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and moral police and so forth, they're not about to accept the Shah Pahlavi's son coming back. And this color revolution business is something that both the American and British, and especially the American deep state, has as its one and only, I guess, playbook. Wherever you go, you just overthrow the existing regime. We saw that in the Velvet Revolution. Then they brought Zelensky into Ukraine, and they brought Yunus into Bangladesh. So that's standard. I don't think that's quite going to work, but we'll have to wait and see. There's also a little bit of shadow boxing going on there because I believe that there has been, for example, I heard rumors that the Iranians were given some advance notice, and therefore they were able to move their enriched uranium out of Fordo. People observed from satellite photographs some trucks removing big barrels, and so maybe there was some leak or some, I guess, shadow boxing and something funny happening there. But anyway, um, let's go look at the war tactics. See, the war, I think, has been in several distinct phases. The first phase, Israel did a blitzkrieg, and that was pretty impressive. And they also did decapitation strikes, which is even more impressive because they were able to smuggle people into and materials, drones into Israel, into Iran proper, into Tehran, and they got so much human intelligence there. They were able to basically wipe out a whole bunch of Iranian commanders as well as nuclear scientists. So that is an impressive feat by Israel. In the second phase, though, things slowed down, and it turned out it became obvious that Iran was not a pushover, and they had plenty of missiles. And even though their air defenses were deprecated in the first phase, they were able to fire large numbers of missiles, which Israel's Iron Dome was not able to 100% stop, which is only to be expected. No air defense mechanism is able to stop every incoming missile. And then the U.S. had to move in and did a big show of force with the B-2 bombers, which are of course picturesque and futuristic Batmobiles, whatever. And they use their big mothers of all bombs, I guess, the bunker buster bombs, and really try to deep penetrate Fordo and Isfahan and Natanz, so on, wherever the Israeli intelligence said the Iranian missiles, sorry, the Iranian nuclear proliferation was happening. But again, there were some funny things going on. That's what I meant by shadow boxing, because when the Iranians wanted to retaliate, they gave Americans notice that they were going to bomb the American airbase in Qatar. So the Americans, hastily removed their planes and their people. So I'm like, is there something going on here that there is PR on both sides, but whatever. And now the last phase, the current phase is, there is a pause, but I don't think things are done. Okay, well, this is just a pause whereby people are able to rearm themselves, and we'll see the next phase of this happening very soon. Now, the last question is, who won and who lost? I would say unequivocally China won because China was not involved, and see, if they're now looking to move into Taiwan. They got a fair bunch of information from, I'm sure, Iran and earlier from Pakistan about air defenses and the efficacy of weapons and so on, in which they can use to prepare their own war plans. Russia lost because Russia was not able to come to Iran's aid. I guess both Iran and Israel look bad. My metaphor is that of two boxers in a ring, and they're so evenly matched. They beat each other up. They're bleeding like mad, and they're blinded because blood is in their eyes and they can barely stand. So that's the situation that they ended up in until the US came in as sort of referee and did this big bombing run and then said, okay, there's a ceasefire. And I guess both sides kind of jumped on the ceasefire because they were exhausted. So that was, so I guess maybe the US sort of won. Trump, who had been an anti-war person all along, all of a sudden here he's in a war. But hey, he may have won because it's the warriors who get the Nobel Peace Prizes. If you look back at Kissinger and Obama and so on, that's what the Norwegians always choose or frequently choose: war maniacs. So anyway, those are the people who won and lost. Now, the big thing for the rest of the world was that we avoided a nuclear holocaust in the World War III. The Straits of Hormuz weren't closed, and oil prices didn't shoot through the roof. But from India's point of view, one of the things to take away is that major powers are completely focused on their own national interests. They don't care about permanent friendships, just permanent interests. And so India has interests in both Israel and in Iran. India and Israel have a multi-billion dollar annual arms trade, which is not completely one way, although most of the technology comes from Israel, including the AWACS, Falcon AWACS, and then Harap drones and so on. But India is now manufacturing under license. I believe it's the Meteor drone that's being manufactured in India and sold back to Israel. So there is a military relationship between the two. And it's part of India's interest in diverting its arms purchases away from just Russia and also to do some Atmanirbharta, to make things here. And as far as Iran is concerned, India has the significant interest in Chabahar port. And India has invested probably like $1 billion there. And that puts India on track to do trade to Afghanistan and Central Asia and Russia and onwards to Europe at a lower cost than going through the Suez because you just go to Chabahar from Mumbai, and from there it goes by land, and the north-south corridor, transportation corridor, can be used by India, and it avoids Pakistan. So that's pretty good. So India needs to do this kind of immorality itself because as a major power, in fact, a great power in the making, you got to look after your own interests. Don't worry about morality and all the people clucking their tongues and so on. You can just tell them to go jump in a lake. So that's what I would suggest India's takeaway is. And finally, I don't believe this is over. It's just phase four of this war. It's just paused, and the next stage can happen at any time. So with that, I think we need to close the chapter on the current hostilities, but be prepared for kinetic war to break out there any moment.